Yeah, I'll do the piece and you can add to it if you want to.
Okay.
All right.
Right.
So I have this insight that the Anglos have had the luxury of being able to forget the fundamental relationship that we can and need to have to our own purpose or our own animating spirit or the soul, if you will, not in a metaphysical sense of something that is supernatural, but in the sense of the
Mhm.
thing that drives us forward and
Intuition.
the things we aim toward, and which is basically the personalization of our group evolutionary strategy,
Yes.
or the anthropomorphization of that, if you will. Um, and the and they've had the luxury, as have had the Americans, because they live in Fortress UK or Fortress America, which provides them huge discounts on defense and makes anything that ever approaches the domain of war and only an expeditionary challenge and logistical task rather than an existential threat.
Yeah.
And for Germans, that's not the case. And that's the civilizational heritage that the Anglos and the Americans, to a large extent, come out of, the Germanic peoples, not necessarily Germany, but the Germanic peoples. And
Go ahead. Go ahead.
and the Germans don't have the luxury, meaning that they have had to maintain a close relationship with that need for maintaining the emotional integrity of what keeps them a member of their group and an exemplar of the group evolutionary strategy, which provides them the confidence and the certainty that in the case of existential threat, that they can draw on the grammar that is articulated in all of the other members who also have that relationship. This is not something that the Anglos or the Americans need to, because they have logistical, operational, economic means of coordinating, and they can draw on that relationship in the background rather than having to foreground it.
Yes, that's brilliant. So that's actually it. And I was like, why is it that, because America's until relatively recently, I mean, during my lifetime, was basically majority German, English speaking majority German. And the people who came here from England came here before 1830, because 1830 is when England and Germany started to culturally diverge. Right. And it really doesn't, and I'm trying to think. So to me, it's like, I was looking at it, why did the Germans do everything right? And I just, this was, and I've been looking for this explanation. The fact that it's, I mean, I don't know if the audience can see what I see, but that it's actually so simple. Because people always explained it to me, we just have this piety or this sense of duty. Well, of course you do. When we get this fucking, 80-foot concrete, 80-foot high, 30-foot thick concrete wall around our countries, so we can have this sort of trust independent of that social need instead of trust dependent on that social need. And so that's why as I was like, why did Germany actually develop, if you read The Arms of Trupp, why did Germany actually develop this wonderful caretaking of labor, but Britain didn't? Right? And I mean, why? When they start to have this community stuff, now the way that the British do it is they say, well, the church is responsible for that.
Right.
And the church is providing community, but that's different.
Well, in that case, they're also effectively, the ruling class, at least, or the aristocracy, is reneging on their part of the deal to actually govern fully, regardless of whether the church succeeds at its part or not. And therefore, they're basically defecting from the deal, not because they maybe want to, but perhaps they don't see that. I don't know.
Well, I mean, there's two things happening at the same time, right? There's two interests. One is that everybody gets wealthier over time by the industrialization. So it's like many things, right? The period of change causes a dip and a climb, right? So there's that going on, but at the time,
but but that paper's over, and it is at a sort of superficial level, in the sense of I can distract myself more, I can make my kids be more entertained, I can take more vacations, but it's not actually in the direction of I actually in a functional, healthy community that I get to contribute to and be taken care of, and therefore this championing of the economic success as a replacement for, or as an excusing of the actual failing of taking responsibility for the healthy of.
I agree, though, in where that's a retrospective.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not saying this is intentional.
The fact that we could get so out of this box of poverty forever was just such an opportunity. So, but what I think the net is that, look, what's because I want to flip it around. Is historically the German princedoms were very protective of their people, right? I mean, and they were small, so that only reinforced it. The aristocracy in Britain was similarly Germanic in this sense, but it's a big difference when you've got a freaking fortress and it's surrounded by a navy, right? And so you
can effectively lock in ruling interests and have coordination in the ruling elite,
right? And so you've got this thing of where the social cohesion is sort of taken for granted, because
so this is then also the mechanism or the generating function for class emergence, at least in the British context.
Yes, right. So whereas in what you're saying is, without those walls, you have to have a social wall, right? If you don't have physical walls, you have to have a social wall.
Well, you have to have a social wall, but you also have to have obligate and perhaps even joyful contribution to the shared interests.
Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, but British have so the problem is, I'm trying not to make I don't want to overstate it, because these are still Germanic cultures, and they're still the most similar culture.
Yes.
But when we're talking about how different communities produce different spins on institutions of trust building, the British one's basically legal, right? Martial and legal, but the German one is more social. Right. And so this we're in it together thing. And it's also, you come back to the other principle of, look, we're surrounded, which was what I read in German history all the time, right? We have to be strong. We have to be dutiful.
Right.
We have to be loyal to one another, right? We have to be pious. We have to be considerate. We have to, because we're fucking surrounded. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think there's also this notion of what is the scope of the investment that you deem as worthy for your class or for your interests? Like, are you scoping it to your class? Are you scoping it to your family? Are you scoping it to yourself? In the British context, because huge discounts on defense provide the ability to let up the need for investment into the totality of the polity, you can scope your interests more proximal to your own personal interests. In the German context, if you do that, you effectively defect from the survival of your polity and of your tribe that you're a part of. And so this is this sort of largest scoping of investment that produces that piety, that, or not produces, but at least is represented in the social experience of that piety.
So the second thing is the transfer. Okay, so the second dimension is England's developing faster. In other words, it invented the modern state. It invented the industrial revolution.
Right.
So those
partially because of the discounts.
Huh?
Partially because of the discounts.
Correct. No, but I'm going to lose my point.
Sorry.
Continue. No, it's okay. I might have lost it anyway. So you have this. So what happens? But then when England becomes outwardly focused, right? It's right. Not only are they safe here, but they're outwardly focused. You get what changes the British culture the most, right? And with this, and it happens early, right? It's not like Germany's still having quite a few issues when England's already going out there, right? So because that's why modernity starts in London and explodes. It's London, Holland, and explodes across into France and then Germany, then
right.
So it's like the Bronze Age expansion, not the Bronze Age expansion, except this is a steel age
expansion.
Right. So when you get to Germany, Germany picks up the scientific and technological innovation, right, which is where German craftsmanship, and you take that, we have to be better than everyone else, right, and we're small and we're surrounded, and no, we're small, but the princedoms are small, and then you get the Napoleonic thing, you get like, okay, we really got to be tight, right, and then you get this, and so all of a sudden Germany's that intellectual center of the world.
Right, and I think here's the big piece about why science and technology and engineering took off so much sort of quicker and stronger in Germany than it did in England after it reached it, is because of that obligate cooperative contribution to the entirety of your polity, meaning that there's class communication and cooperation at all times. And the people who are at the top, they can rely on excellence at all levels, rather than sort of only moving people through economic and legal means, if you will. And so
we depend, because of the expansion. In other words, because there's explosive, we could rely on entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Where the Germans had to rely on, what would you call
it? Institutional formation.
Yeah, exactly. So that's probably the explanation. I was
basically operating like an army as a society. Like again, it's the same thing. Like whereas yours is yes,
socially
yours is more like a rating party.
Yes. Oh, that's even better. Well, that's,
yeah. I mean, this is,
yeah. I mean, America. I mean, English. They act like rating parties.
Yeah. Yeah.
And which is what stepbrothers do.
And so another implication of this is, and another explanation for the legal focus of the British and the Anglos, or the Americans, is once you have those discounts and once you take for granted the integrity of the polity, you can focus on the programming of the people or of the institutions as the highest leverage activity that gets you the largest return. And so it's basically like in any programming activity, once you get to a certain level of integrity of the system, the highest leverage point you can get is just abstracting higher and having more of the foundations upon which the abstraction rests moved by better abstractions, rather than refactoring the entirety to be most continuously disambiguating all of its pieces at all times, at all levels, if you will.
You just see it today. As I mean, you're going to defeat German engineering? Not with American engineering. Well, you're going to defeat American entrepreneurship with anybody? Not going to fucking happen.
Right.
I mean, I've tried to start businesses in Europe or buy businesses in Europe.
I mean, Walmart tried to come here, or tried to come there, and they failed because the culture of the workers did not appreciate the way that they operated with them.
All right, so I think I've got a little better handle on this now, because it's just so okay. So let's pull it up a class.
Yes.
Okay, so you're in the lesser aristocracy, like my family, which sounds a lot fancier than it is. It's really what we would call the upper middle class.
Right.
So, and then you're in the aristocracy, which is the people who have, they have lots of land and they're responsible for shared government. So, my ancestors, they're usually in government, sort of, but it's more like being on the town council today, than it would have been.
The one that gets called upon for excellence rather than the one that habitually sits on the throne.
Well, it's just like business at a different scale. Like, I read these documents signed by my ancestors in northern France back in, I don't know, what was it? was around the year 1000, and it's just, yeah, this guy's not a shit, right? I'll vouch for him. He could this. I'll stand behind this deal, right? This is, you know what I mean? It's just
decidability, judgment.
it's just okay. It's a kind of insurance, right?
Yes.
It's reputational
vouching. Yeah,
because you don't have enough, right? And this is that's a I mean 1,000 years ago. That's a long fucking time ago. I mean,
right.
And then you read certain things like the plague was that's why my name isn't Didolieta anymore. It's Doolittle, is because the fucking plague destroyed names. It destroyed literacy. It destroyed names. And my family's been literate since the year 1000. I know, right? So
you should rechange your name to it.
It's just the problem is in at least in America, my name has some value in certain parts.
Right.
So,
right.
As much as I've got chipped teeth because of it, anyway, so the you look through this history and you're like, oh, but how do you, was it, you're the aristocracy, right? And we like to shit on the aristocracy. The truth is, the Northern European, and outside of France, basically any Germanic, I mean, France is, don't get me started, because they're shits.
You'll do a fine job of getting yourself started, Curt. You'll do a fine job of
you don't have that help. I don't need any help. But the German aristocracy, because they had these 300 whatever princedoms, they had to be effing responsible.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, the British, because they have these manors and estates, it's some scale, they've got to be responsible, right? So because it's basically running a business. If your people aren't doing well, you're screwed, right?
Right.
The king's going to say, yeah, we call them nobility, but the difference between aristocracy and nobility is pretty simple. I'm aristocracy, I got money, right? I'm nobility, I got responsibilities, right, which were given to me, and they can be taken, and so can the income from that be taken. So if I'm sitting here and saying, okay, well, I'm in the nobility, and the king comes along and says, you're shit with your people, for one or the other, right? Because you're not helping them, or because you're not getting them to produce enough to contribute to pay for the state, or conversely, they're complaining.
You're producing conflict.
You're producing conflict, then you get out. So they have this responsibility, frankly, that modern politicians don't demonstrate at all.
Right.
Or at least they demonstrate at a baseline that is devolutionary than evolutionary. So you see this makes sense, but the fact that because Germany was considered a little provincial, it's a nice word for most of history.
Yeah.
And even despite the fact that the Italians, the Spanish, the French, and the British all said, no, you leave the Germans alone because they're holding the freaking hordes back. Right, we don't fuck with the Germans. They keep the bad guys over there, so we're okay. Right, so there were like 3 pacts like that I remember. It might have been more. Anyway, so it's beginning to get clear to me how. Thank you for this. How these two people, these are just Germanic people, right?
Yep. Just different form of societal expression of the same underlying principles.
Right, and it's like I always say, it always comes down to geography.
Yep.
Right. Everything it's geography and how many assholes are around us. Right. I mean, it's just,
and how alike are they to us?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, well, that describes pretty much everything. And how many more of us or them are there, right? I mean, it's just that. Right. And so that makes it much clearer. And I want to thank you for that, because it's been one of those things like, I have to go there. I have to spend, like, by the time I was done in Russia and Ukraine, I mean, I know exactly how those fucking places work, and it's actually hysterical. It's basically gangland Chicago. right? I mean, except they shoot each other less.
Right.
And there's plenty of
They
ways.
just punch each other more.
What?
They just punch each other more.
They punch each other more, and it's more like economic. And it's more like, yeah, it's just
vassaldom. Yeah,
it's just crazy. But in their own cute way, at least the Ukrainians in their own cute way, they sort of make it work because they're actually quite peaceable people. They're not like the Russians. Russians are got to be the Russians because look what the hell's to the east. But I mean, the Ukrainians, they're peaceable people. Gosh, I love them. But anyway, so you lived. I'm thinking I got to go to Germany because what the fuck? This is driving me nuts. Okay, I got to understand. But I should look at my own work and say, oh, it's obvious, which is what you just did, which I find humiliating. Like I find many things when they don't understand them.
These are the hard to appreciate joys of being a teacher when your students understand implications of your work that you didn't make before them.
Yes. It always, but the insight is quite sensible. You need a social wall. Well, I mean, how did look at the Jews' social wall or the social wall?
I like the term social wall, but I think the thing that I know whether it completely captures it, but it's this: I need to be able to rely on that you feel as I do about the value of us surviving.
Yes.
And if I can't rely on that being an actually felt feeling in you, you will not cooperate with me at once, instantly, to the full extent, until the end. And that is sort of gas. This is like air left in the tank that could be filled by gas that I need to be there for us to succeed at surviving at all.
Yes. And so go back to first principles. So they're both Germanic cultures militial. In other words, because of the territory, and it's harder in Germany than in England.
Right.
Because of the territory, it's very hard to produce a central military. It's basically impossible.
Right. And so then you produce a militia in all contexts, not just in kinetic force.
Correct. And so that's where I said, everybody, it's like, who's doing this right now that I'm beginning to, I was talking with somebody, you're doing it, your culture's doing it right. It's like, you got to start with the militia, right? Because if you start with the militia, then you have the us.
Right.
You have the us, then you can have rule of law.
Right.
Have rule of law, then you can have politics.
Right.
But if you don't have rule of law, you don't have politics. You
just have
authority
war.
And corruption, right?
Or war.
Yes. Which I love when they say, well, it's like using the word philosophy is like, no, Europeans use philosophy. There's something, the Chinese use something like it. The Hindus use something like less like it. The Middle East uses something that's not like it at all, or very different from it. And then the Africans use what we would think of as natural philosophy, magic.
Right.
And so it's like, this is another one of those problems of what do you mean by politics? Well, Europeans do politics.
Right. Because they can afford to.
Because they can afford to, right? I mean, because they made it possible, right, to afford to. And what do you need? You need arms carryable by individual men, right?
Yep.
You need those men to cooperate in large numbers to obtain a victory, right? And you need the inability to form a standing army without that can compete without those men.
Right.
In other words, you have a dependency chain that preserves the social and political cohesion.
Right.
And when you were talking, I'm thinking about, well, what is, fucking England just kills off the church, right? Right. They didn't kill it off. That's not correct. They nationalize the church. That's number one. So they got this territorial border thing. They nationalize the church. They develop a legalistic system more so than a social system, right? Because that's really what the Normans brought, right? Is a legalistic system instead of a sacred system.
Right.
In other words, an impersonal system.
You basically invest resources in the superior patterning of force exertion by the standing responsible people, rather than attempting to involve all the members of society into the creation of the society itself.
Right. Which is, but as long as that underlying we're in this together works.
Right.
So this is interesting. So when 1830 happens and and then Germany becomes the head of intellectual. I mean, really, Germany was this. I'm so fucking angry about this because you had the second. I'm never going to get over it. I'll be on my deathbed thinking, if only.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it, because we have this incredible intellectual, because it's really different how the intellectual force of England was externalized into entrepreneurship, where the Germans took over the Industrial Revolution and internalized it into excellence.
Right.
And
here's a term that I've been playing with, which already exists, but it's not. It's orthopraxy. It's right action. It's not orthodoxy. It's not what is the prevailing and obligate dogma, but what is the obligate behavioral pattern, and your contribution. So and how do you pattern that contribution? And so it's and that's what the orthodoxy or the belief set masks, or that's what people talk about, because that's what more easy to talk about because it lives in words and in writing. But the actual thing, the actual capital that these people, that the Germans are shaping, is the behavioral capital, and then also, of course, by extension, the human capital underneath that, and so on. And that is where the highest leverage lies, but it's also the highest requirement of investment.
Yeah, so you're giving another example of something that's really become really obvious, is that America's falling apart for the reasons that we took the Anglo approach to culture after the post-war period, instead of maintaining the German approach to culture and education, which is that the church actually invested very heavily in behavioral training, but by taking away the church and then not maintaining it in education, what we did is we broke the fundamental foundations necessary to preserve that behavior. That you broke
the parenting
to sacrifice instead of dedication to hyperconsumption.
Right. You basically broke the parenting structure of the society.
Well, Martin, you're just joining us. We're having a talk on German versus Anglo, which I think we've now got me to understand it. Now I'm going to pretend I forgot all this so I can still go live in Germany for you. I dated a woman in Munich for quite a while. Did I tell you?
I think you told us, yeah.
She picked me up on a plane. Yeah. She picked me up on a plane.
This is another obligate contribution thing. Like the woman said, but it's my job to make it possible that this happens in the first place. And if you won't take the initiative, I will.
Well, I'm just gregarious, right? So I get this really weird reactions because I'm a gregarious, but I'm also on a bit on the spectrum, so I'm kind of clueless, right? Especially with women, right? A woman has basically got to say, whisper in my ear, I want to have sex with you before I have any idea that we're having anything other than a conversation, right? Which has happened more times than you can imagine, because I am so clueless. But anyway, so you just get this thing where I was like, well, you get the reaction where I'm being gregarious, she thinks I'm hitting on her. I can't imagine why the fuck you would think I would hit on you, right? I mean, where did you get that from? I'm just kind and interested and gregarious, right? And then you get the other end of the spectrum, which is I'm just kind and gregarious, and I get the attraction thing, and I'm not seeking it, right? So like you get rejection or attraction, right? And then the people in the middle just think you're weird, right? Like, why are you so friendly? I don't know. It's just.
What are you trying to get? And
Yeah,
like, I'm not trying to get, I'm just
trying to get
involving you
anything.
into my Skinner box.
Brad was teasing me last night because I actually think of pretty much everything I do as an experiment. Right? I mean, it's so.
Same.
You do the same, right? Everything's an experiment. It's not an experience like a ride. It's always, if I'm doing this, what experiment can I run here? And people are great to run experiments on. They're hysterical. And they, unless it's like the stuff we've had to do with King of the Hill games, it's actually kind of fun, right? I mean, it's kind of entertaining. Anyway, so I think we've solved this. Have we solved this issue? If if you, I'm going to throw it back at you and tease you because I love doing this. So if you knew this, why did you let me suffer for so long, not knowing the answer? How many more times you gonna know something and not tell me while I spin on it for a long time?
We had forms of it already. We just didn't put them together and articulate them in the way that I think actually gives you that final clarity that makes you say it's so simple.
Right.
I think, I mean, you gave me the insight, or you articulate the insight that I picked up from you, that the Anglos had the luxury of having Fortress UK, basically, which provides them the discounts and so on. And so it's just one of those things that has to reverberate throughout the entirety of the understanding or in the structure before you can put together the simple pieces that actually make the causal links work.
So what do we do? I know the answer to this, but I'm doing it for rhetorical value. What is, if you look at what most people do, some historians, there's ordinary folk do, people who are educated do, some history, non-professional historians, some professional historians, unfortunately, even some better historians. What is it that we do differently from them? In other words, why is it hard for us to come up with this answer, even though we're in the habit of coming up with causality? That's what we do.
Because right? We don't justify our priors, and we falsify. And not only that, we subordinate the exploration into the overall venture, which is the reconstitution of the group evolutionary strategy of our ancestors. Right. And the other people don't, or at least they don't do it consciously. They are funded and patronized by extant institutions that they don't even understand the originating function of, and therefore they don't need to be responsible to a standard of weights and measures that were formulated before their time. And so they are basically just floating and just reverberating through, well, not reverberating, but like ricocheting, like, what do you say, a pachinko ball in the existing structures of incentives, because they don't have the intuitions, neither the intuitions nor the means to actually create institutions. And so they can't step outside of that realm of the existent, which you can, because you have built and acquired and merged companies all of your life. So you know what it looks like to create that thing rather than just live in it.
Creating community in an organization is as important and more important than creating every other process and procedure. Mm-hmm. Right? At least that's how I approach it. And I think that's why people have said this, that's why they like working. Right. Is I look at a business as a society that has to return a profit. Mm-hmm. And right, I mean, that's really how I look. Yeah, I don't think of it.
And a society returns a profit merely by continuing its survival.
Right. I mean, and everybody used to tease me about this. Why do you have such big staff meeting and management meetings? And why do you have these? Because I get everybody on the same fucking page.
And it's not just a ritual to show who is in charge, but it is an actual teaching endeavor.
I run a company like I'm running a grad school class. Yep. Right. And
push understanding and responsibility to the edges.
That's right. And it's it works every time. It's just flawless. And people love it because it's like everything else. People want to be led. They just want to choose their leaders.
Yes.
They want, right? The second thing is they want to be, you know, it's like everything else. They want to make a choice and own it themselves.
Yes, and they want to know and feel that their trust in you or their being led by you is justified. Because and the
their
easier that is,
sacrifices are not arbitrary. Right. They think it's have to happen because we can't get along together. We can't get through something together without it.
Right. And it's worth going the extra mile for a reason other than personal advancement. But actually the success of the whole depends on me actively contributing to its health.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we went down on this thread. I'm too interested in that topic because we both have this shared interest in organizational development, right?
Yes.
So part of me is like, let's go play, you know what?
Yes. Maybe we can do a detour just briefly to that other tweet that you said, like, why didn't you tell me earlier as well?
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Right, the constitutional piece. Yeah.
Well, you said why don't we take a detour? Now they say, oh, Curt, let's take this detour. And I'm like, okay, I'll follow. And you're like, wait a minute, who's following who here? So you tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I had always intuited, but had never had the means to articulate it in a way to myself or to others that they would understand what my intuition was actually attempting to communicate, that the way that you have spoken about the Constitution and the way that the Constitution, both the existing American one as well as the redesigned or rewritten one that you have created, or that I guess in a sense we have created, misses the comprehensiveness of the causal links or generator functions that provide the ground upon which something like this rests, the purpose that something like this actually aims at, and the means by which it comes into existence is judged on its own merits and can actually be adjusted, not by revolution entirely, although that of course is the large cycle one, but actually, as we were saying, like that a law should state its purpose, should state the conditions upon which it expires, and should state or should be understood both by the ones that are issuing it as well as the ones that are subject to it in whatever form, what it aims at, how it comes into existence, what legitimacy it relies upon, and what means there are to change it.
Yes.
And so that had been missing in the things that I had seen from you talk about it, or also in the thing itself. I have never actually read the entire Constitution of the States or this one that you've been rewriting. And so I didn't know, but my intuition and my understanding and everything that I had seen was telling me this was missing. And so this is why I was so supremely interested in the piece of authority and legitimacy and the that conversation we had, because it gets to the crux of what extent human organization and what stands of weights and measures that this human organization subjects itself to or lives by produces this and keeps it being productive.
Yes. Well, of course, my whole thing
and you have a blindness to it because you swim in that water, because you already are in the aristocracy in that sense, and you don't have to concern yourself the vast majority of your time with those causal links all the way down through the classes and those intuitions and the generating functions, because you just assume that they're there. And if they're not there, then something is so wrong that you have to basically perform the larger act of reconstitution and revolution.
Yeah, I think what happens in my mind, which is, is that if the engineering of incentives is thorough enough to prevent harm, evils, right? You're never going to get rid of accidents,
right?
But if you get away with seditious, treasons, and evils, if you get away, you can get that precise enough that behavior will emerge.
Right.
And what I hear you saying, and correct me because I might be making a leap here, is that in many in the Declaration we say something in America, in the Federalist Papers we say something, in the Constitution we say something, in the Bill of Rights we say something. And unfortunately, like the Federalist Papers aren't included.
Magna Carta.
The Commentary on the Laws of England by Blackstone, that's not included, right? But what you're saying is that is in other countries' constitutions outside of the English sphere is this social ambition that has to be taken care of, that has to be stated just as positively as the rest. And that's why I'm asking you. I don't know the answer.
Something like that. I think there's a different thing. It's organizations like humans have a developmental path. They have a maturation cycle.
Yes.
They either operate on surplus that they generate, or they operate on deficit. Yes. And what we are attempting, I think, to do is to reconstitute ourselves such that we can take the surplus that is there in, I'll just call it vital energy for the moment, we can science that in a second, of the individual all the way up to that of the civilization. So the way that our bodies work is that they are trillions and trillions of cells cooperating in vast complexes of infrastructure, of organization, and so on. Our society and our civilization is no different from that. Yeah. But how do we have the possibility of us as individuals organizing ourselves coherently for our survival? We have it because there's surplus at every level that can be passed up the chain of persistence to produce adaptation at that and persistence. Yes. At that level. And yes. So I want that same property to be represented in the understanding and the actual creation and adaptation of the way that our civilization constitutes and reconstitutes itself. And in order to do that, it has to rise up to the level of cognition or conscious awareness for us, and also the extant mechanisms by which members of the polity of the civilization can point to it and refer to it and say, these are the principles by which we operate. Here is a defection from this. I mean, that's something you're doing and saying as well. Basically, if you can judge anybody's behavior, you can point out defection and treason and so on, and then to produce the means by which every member of every form of organization can contribute to the health, the constitution, and the reconstitution of the organization that they're a part of. And so in the constitution, when it's not stated, whether inside of it itself or outside in supplementary material, how this comes into existence, by what principles it operates and by what principles it comes into existence, and what the originating function for it is, which is something that the people who bring it into existence feel or unconsciously act upon, then we have no causal chain that we can point at to say, here's where they went wrong, because they were attempting to do something, but they maybe didn't have enough technical knowledge, or there were accident circumstances that prevented them from actually going the full way, and so on. And so I want to maintain that causal chain all the way through, not just into cognition, but what is the purpose of the cognition that you're performing, that it is contributing to. The cognition doesn't...
I got it. So I'm gonna... We have 8 volumes. You realize how long it could take us to produce all 8 volumes? Anyway, so the last one's religion. Now, I don't think of, I think of religion like a scientist. What are the things it's got to, what is the demand that's being generated by the human animal? Is that a rational demand, or what are the procedures we can use to satisfy that demand?
I'm going to challenge you, but continue.
Wait a minute, right. And then how can we institutionalize a production of the satisfaction of that demand, right? And so, and then we have to understand that brains are different. You can't get everybody, just like we need religion and philosophy and empiricism and science and computation, which is what we do, right? Just as you need those things, we talked about earlier, what do? We look for first principles, which means we look for what's true first, then we look for what's good, right? And so, or we look for what's good and figure out what's true in it, right? Or whatever. Hold on, let me get that. And so in this sense but there's some people, they just need direction. And they direction that's followed by their intuitions without too much reason. There's people who are comfortable with reasoning within a limited order, which is, rules based. There's people who are comfortable in a principles based order. There are people who are comfortable in an evidentiary order. There are people comfortable in abstract, theoretical, generalized, limited number of rules, science. And there are people who are comfortable like us, who can work with a small number of first principles and reconstruct all of reality with, basically 15 Lego blocks, right? I mean, there's this whole spectrum. Well, I mean, yeah, but there's also a whole spectrum of people who need those things, whether it's simply, if you say, well, we all have 140 IQs and we all still grow through in a growth cycle where we're capable of dealing with the anthropomorphic, which is the religious, and the completely abstract and independent of anthropomorphism, which is the computation. There's this spectrum here, and we go through these life cycles, and some of us might max out, right? So, but then again, you have people with different abilities, right? And some people, they're going to max out at training their intuition. They're going to max out at training their ability to follow rules. They're going to max out at their ability to generalize themselves into principles. They're going to max out at the principles modified by evidence. They're going to max out by theoretical concepts and combinations of laws in the universe, or they're going to max out at maxing out a computation for first principles is about as far as you can go. So I don't think there's anywhere left. But they're going to max out somewhere in that. So when I say we have to have religion, I just mean we have to have a spectrum of. We have to have the story, the social story that produces value that can be told at the religious level, which is the group evolutionary strategy. All right, so that's what I was trying to make, the point I was trying to make. Now you can shoot. Now you can tell me here's where you're wrong about religion. I wanted to get the thing out there in case but anyway, now you can tell me where I'm wrong.
I don't think you're wrong. But why did you bring the religion piece into it? Because you think that's the thing I'm interested in?
I don't think you're interested. I'm saying that's how I frame the problem. Is that you need the group strategy to be something people can aspire to together, right? And does that make sense?
Yes.
And so that's what I was getting at. But how do you teach that group strategy other than as a narrative that's anthropomorphic and anthropocentric?
Right. Well, I guess. Okay, there's a couple different pieces here. Let me see whether I can list them all and then knock them down. One for sure is that religion imports associations of an institutionalization of that frame that is usually somewhat particular to the group that does that. And I'm more interested. I think that the next form of religion, if you will be civilization scale religion rather than.
I agree.
And so it will show up in many different sort of high level abstraction frames that are incommensurable with each other at the abstraction level at the top, but that are commensurable at the lower level programming that they all rely upon, and that all the priests and all the holders of responsibility within the structure are privy to, and that they leverage to produce the abstractions that are meaningful for their local constituencies that they are taking care of. And so the religion then looks more like a fluency in group evolutionary strategy and the means by which you translate it into grammars that are receivable by your local constituency than it does to be a committed believer of a particular grammar of your local constituency that you get to take care of.
I agree. However, the part I would take is what I understand is training the intuition independent of reason. And so the thing we know, when that's like I said, religion was the hard problem, right? It's like, how do I understand? It took me years of working on this. And
hard problem for you.
What?
Hard problem for you.
Well, you're such a dick.
Because your intuitions are furthest from its operational modes.
Oh, of course. So you get down there, and it really, but people said, and historically, historians have largely been right. The only thing I've been able to do is understand it as a cognitive science, right? Because what you're really talking about is group evolutionary strategy produced through cognitive behavioral therapy, right? And there's just a means of doing that. So what is cognitive behavioral therapy produced by? It's produced by ritual and social proof and social reward. So, and what does that evolve from? It evolves from the hunting cycle, the prey cycle. The hunting cycle arises from the prey cycle. The feast cycle arises from the prey cycle. And so what we have is we go hunt stuff together. We live in a society where we're individuals somewhat competing as well as cooperating. We go on a hunt together. We bring back the feast, right? We have the feast, at which point we're all sort of equal. And then afterwards, you have the celebration, maybe before you eat or while it's cooking or after you've cooked. And then you have the sex. Right. And then you go to sleep.
The consumption of the surplus.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's so obvious, right? I mean, it's just a very simple iterative process. Right. And so when people are spiritually fulfilled, spirit basically means your intuition. It's low level. The whole brain, the whole 3-stage, reptile, mammal, human thing it's not quite true, but it's close enough, right? It's close enough to there's a point at which increases in precision for the meaning you're trying to convey don't help anything. They just cloud the issue.
Yeah, they actually take away from further contribution to the success of the
right. And whereas the problem is when you use a rough analogy that's close enough, people try to use it as a measurement instead of an analogy, and they make silly deductions from it. Right? Yes. So, but for the purpose of transmission, that's different from the purpose of further inquisition, right?
Yes.
So you're sitting there talking to people and you're like, well, okay, so for all intents and purposes, what makes the social animal feel good is running with the pack. So when people why? Shared, you're all doing the same fucking thing. You have radically distributed your senses to the whole group, which is communicated by bodily language, like fish, right?
Which produces a felt trust of everybody.
Right. And you're safe because of it, right? And your need to depend on the costly and slow process of reason is eliminated. So you're relaxed. So you're safe and you're relaxed. And so if your body,
and you're present and capable.
Yes, it's actually a time you can experience. So when we say, what is that spiritual feeling? It's the longing for that.
Yeah.
Right. That's all it is. It's a purely simple, and it's not like the research isn't out there, but the problem is that's like 13 layers deep in the.
Right.
Go ahead.
I think you're leaving something out, though, or rather not fully disambiguating it, which is, you said it's the group evolutionary strategy entrained through cognitive behavioral training. But it's not just cognitive behavioral training. It's cognitive and nervous behavioral training, in the sense of the cognitive piece is a meaningful one. It's important, but it's the actual bodily movement-based training that makes the difference, because it patterns you.
This is a problem with the term I've never. It's like, the stupid stuff. Without you saying that, I would never have thought of this, because it's like.
I just thought of it now.
Right. I mean, but so I'm thinking, well, that's not what cognitive behavior means. It means I'm cognitively trying to change the intuition.
Right, and that's
so that just means we're trying to educate you, right?
Yes, but
through experience, right? It doesn't mean there's any reason involved on your part. It's the opposite.
Okay, right? But I think the term makes that not entirely clear to the average consumer of it. And the thing
which I never would have thought of until you said it. I mean, it just okay. What?
And the thing I'm
because
attempting to point out.
I understand the subject, it would never occur to me. But now that you've said it, it sounds fucking stupid. Right?
Well,
how many times are you going to make me feel dumb during this conversation?
That's all on you. And you feeling dumb as a consequence of me pointing something out. No, but I think what I'm just attempting to keep present in that is that partially because you get the highest return on the investment into cognitive change of anybody that I know, probably. You're privileged that form of adaptation in your own intuitions over the other ones. You can cognitively understand all the other ones, but most of the other people, they have a much deeper relationship with the non-cognitive means of adaptation. And so I'm just attempting to keep that present in that discourse.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say it openly, is that I use therapists like people use doctors, right? I don't struggle over shit, right? If I'm having a problem with something, I go hire somebody to help me fix it, right? And so it may take me one visit, which has happened, right? I'm just like, can I just talk through this shit? Because sometimes you just talk to your friends, but some stuff you like to talk to my friends. I don't want to burden with this crap.
So, Curt, are you saying we're all your distributed therapists?
What?
Are you saying we are all your distributed therapists?
Well, we're all each other's distributed therapists. That's what friends are. Anyway, so sharing the prefrontal cortex. Yeah. But so when I've been to them for them, I have to explain them because it's really hard. I know you're going to come at me from an angle, but let me explain. Feelings to me are way the fuck over there, over the next hill, especially fear or doubt. Right? I mean, they're way over there. They vaguely exist if I look at them, or if I realize I'm agitated, and maybe I have to go to figure out why. Right. So I have to understand a thing before those feelings move from the other side of that hill to somewhere.
No shit.
Right. So it's like and so I say, so when you worry about my feelings, I had this talk with Brad about Noah's the other day too. Similar thing is that when you talk about my feelings, that's actually, I have to understand it. And so one of the problems with the structure of, which is why I feel men are unserved by most therapy, is that they don't rotate it for the masculine and say, because I say women are trying to escape the pressure.
Yes.
Of right. And men
are trying to
carry the weight.
The existential cares,
right. And so we want to know how to carry the weight. And he's just like, oh, dude, there's just no way to do that. You can say, oh, okay, then it's not a problem anymore. Right. I can't lift something that heavy. It's not a problem. Right. We don't need to feel. We're not going to feel bad about it. It's like, dude, it's a physical impossibility. Why do I got to feel bad about it? But women, they you can't get them over it.
Right.
So they have to get their feelings around something.
Yes.
Right, where men have to flip it around. And so this is why therapy, it's why it's a 70-30 or 80-20 male-female ratio in therapy. And it's why most male therapy doesn't work, is because I keep telling them, do you realize every guy you say that to is offended, insulted, and degraded by just asking the fucking question? Because you're asking him to be a pussy. You're saying, oh, I can't carry this weight. Right? It's too much for me. You're not saying, dude, can the fucking human body lift that much weight? I mean, yours. I mean, like, some guys can put, I'm down to like where I can bench like 120, whereas I used to be 190, right? All right. I mean, I'm getting old, I'm getting weak, right? So 120. So, I can still like clean and press okay, right? But, the whole thing of, I'm just weaker because I'm getting older and I'm fit and not as strong as I was, right? So if you told me, can I lift 300 pounds? I'm like, fuck no. I can't bench 300 pounds, not unless I want to strangle myself with a barbell.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, then it's not a problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Or and this is the other thing that psychologists or therapists are incapable of or don't typically do, which Peterson did which is a crucial distinction, which is to actually involve themselves in creating a solution that does not rely on the adaptability and trainability of the person itself, but on the investment of their communal context into them, which actually provides them the assurance and the capital and the feeling of security and so on.
Right.
I want to add one or two more things, which is, you said you care about truth before everything else. I don't think that's true. I think that what you care about is the investability of the venture, which is effectively truth. Like truthfulness or falsifiability or the thing being true means, will this thing scale to all scales of cooperation? And so truthfulness is effectively, is this worthy of investment of everybody regardless of context? And I think
let me think about that. Let me test that hypothesis.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can quite relate to that. I think of it as, what are the human incentives to do something that are not false or irreciprocal?
Yes. What does that mean?
Right, I know, but and so I think what you're doing is saying, okay, and the second thing is, I don't look at it quite like that. What is the field of human incentives here? Of them, what are the good and the bad? How do I eliminate the bad, remaining the good? And then and so what you're really saying is it's just a very mathematical way of looking at morality. No,
it's funny that, well, yes, it is. And it's funny that you say exactly those terms, because that's actually James Senegata's term as well, mathematical morality. And what I'm attempting to do here and show you that I'm doing is reframing the via negativa into the via positiva, and as emerging from the via positiva, which is effectively just life doing life things. And so the truth-seeking instinct is not some abnormality of life doing life things or a weird human idiosyncrasy, but it is
but it's too close to Peterson's Darwinian truth versus truth.
I don't know that, but I'm not attempting to ambiguate something. I'm just.
I know, but I can't tell. I'm trying to figure out how do I prevent.
Sure, I'll help you.
Ambiguity. Okay.
It is because what makes anybody invest any energy into anything? It's to get some return on it, right? And so that's part of what I think the truth seeking or the scientific endeavor is. It's to, as we said before in the last chat, that science is, and the falsificationary apparatus and the method itself are basically, what means do I have at the beginning of a process to discern whether this is worthy my investment or our investment at escalating scales of pouring resources into this. And so the constitution of scientific knowledge and principles represents the accumulated capital, informational capital, that allows us to do that at each step along the way. And so the more we have that at the beginning, the less we spend energy on things that are not actually going to produce those returns, because the informational content that they presented us at the beginning when we were starting to go down that road was sufficient for us to discern it if we had the informational tools to do so. If we don't have them, then we have to basically invest the energy up to the point where it no longer proves a return. Or it actually helps us create new informational tools to know in advance that this was not worth it going down that road.
Your first explanation was the best. Your second one confused me. And your third one, which you just finished, troubled me. And the reason is that people justify them out of any via positive. Sure,
but I'm not saying that I'm attempting to reify something or to champion something as something that people...
Hold on, then I've got... it's possible that I'm stuck on the wrong question.
Okay, I think I understand where the problem lies, because via positive for you, and I guess for me as well, in some sense, represents this is the thing that you should be doing, which I guess, interesting. So maybe we have to either reconstitute the terms here or reinterpret them or redefine them. Mm-hmm. Because to me, via positiva, in the framing that we've used via positive so far, is a particular implementation of a positive vision that leaves out high resolution information that is superfluous to the contribution to a shared aim.
Positiva, right? Means I'm assuming a conclusion and working my way to it.
Okay, well, that's not the definition I was operating under, for sure.
So that's what it means. Via negativa is assuming you don't know fucking anything. Okay, and you're eliminating all the falsehoods.
Okay, and so then
hold on. And adversarialism is the competition between the two.
Okay.
Right. So that's Darwinian survival.
Okay, then I'm just pointing to that evolutionary computation operates on some operates through energy and through persistence and through escalating scales and so on. And so this is another form of evolutionary computation. That what does the evolutionary computational process do? It continues to accumulate persistence at escalating scales.
Okay,
right?
So now we have three axes, right? Sorry, so because there's somebody who's going to want to understand this other than you and me, right? And so here's what you're saying. There is an order to the universe called evolutionary computation. That's just fact, right? Now, what you're talking about is how the fuck do we figure it out, right? All right. Now, so that we figure it out by hypothesis and falsification, adversarial competition, right? Right. That's how we figure it out. The step that happens that's problem to is people say, here's something I would like. Let's figure out how to have that without doing the accounting necessary to determine the externalities produced by it, or even if it's possible.
Right.
Right. So that's the difference. And so
the externalities and the implications. Yeah.
Yeah. The implications, externalities, of the thing. So most of us well, I want to do this, but the secondary effects of that negate the benefits of everything else. It's like the thing that really dropped. I mean, the British got rid of slavery, right? And they really did. But when Americans got rid of slavery, right, they did it with a war that cost 500,000 lives out of a fairly small population, which was incredibly destructive because, frankly, the majority of the culture was Southern. So it's very harmful. So, but what the reality was, in 30 years, slavery was economically unviable, and that was already visible in 1865.
Right.
Right. The same civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was an attempt to apply Soviet-level social engineering to, in other words, by the left. This is not what the progressives are thinking. The progressives are naive Christian idiots that are very kind and good-hearted morons, right? But the communists are not good-intentioned people. So they were trying to use Soviet-level re-engineering, like the Great Society nonsense. And what they did instead was, the African Americans had made more progress in the past 30 years on their own without screwing with them and developing family, community, an emergent middle class, and an emergent set of elites when they frankly had the elites. And if they'd let them alone for 30 years, we would have not had the destruction of the Black family. So which has been catastrophic.
Not just for them.
Well, it's not just for them, it's for the society as a whole. So when I look at this, I say, well, that's a via positiva. That's a trying to bring out the good,
right,
while assuming the externalities, which is a very female thing, right? Right. Whereas it wasn't. What the right answer was, well, they're integrating, right?
Right.
When they get there, they can have it. They're slaves. I mean, it sucks for the people who are there now, but we can do two things. We can either pay them and we send them away, right? We can buy them out, which would have been fine. It would have been really disruptive for this other kind. But buy them out. Oh, we can set a date by which these gradual things happen, which is kind of how the Germans do policy anyway, right? We could have done those things without trying to take the evolutionary computation of adaptation out of the social process.
Right. And I guess what I'm doing here is I'm positing that it is possible for an individual to develop excellence in performing evolutionary computation, both in the context of their own lives as well as in the context of organizations and any context that they find themselves in, and to unify the positive construction of productive structure, that capacity.
What can you do without religion as the institution necessary to inculcate that behavior in generations of people? Now, I don't mean religion in the supernatural sense. I mean it in the sense you described it, as a civilization-wide narrative that's the group evolutionary strategy that's not false. In other words, doesn't make any false promises.
I don't. That's not the subject I guess I'm attempting to address. I'm attempting to address how any behavior, including falsificationary behavior, comes out of an impulse or some expression of an interest. So that, because we act on our interest, right? We have demonstrated interest. That's one of the
That's what we do. We look for
incentives
incentives as first principles, which turn out to be evolutionary computation. Evolutionary computation.
Acquisitionism 101.
Exactly. I mean, it's
right. Good. But so this is what I'm pointing at, because I feel that either the way that it's currently discussed in our conversations, at least for the average viewership, it is separated and it is removed from relationship to the demonstrated interest that people demonstrate. So what I'm saying is falsification, the scientific enterprise, anything that is truth-seeking is itself a demonstrated interest that relies on people finding it worthwhile to invest the energy to get the returns that come out of that. And so what is that? What is that interest that activity is based upon? I would venture to guess, or I would propose that it is an impulse that can intuitively assess the investability of an evolutionary or like a venture that produces returns for the tribe. And so the truth-seeking impulse then at its highest capacity.
It's what you're saying is that when I said I seek truth first instead of the good, I meant that epistemologically in the ascertainment of the information necessary for the decision.
Yes, Curt.
What you're saying is that no, it's not actually. When you say truth first, you're actually searching the good first, right? But
you are
right.
But the good that will scale the furthest.
Yes, I understood.
And this is what the autists also do. Like the autists say no to things that are socially convenient and useful in the context that they're in, because they are attempting to hold for a larger constitution of cooperation that would require the higher resolution of the rules by which everybody operates. This is what the male contribution to the scaling of, this is the mechanism by which males create civilization at scale.
So you're still saying female, short-term, experiential, empathic, male, long, systemic.
Yes, and I'm attempting to show how when we separate out the falsificationary impulse or the truth-seeking behavior from the
good-seeking behavior.
Yes, we are actually making our case weaker, and we're wrong.
Well, okay. So again, this is another.
But
no. I mean, it's. I want to summarize so that I can contextualize. So what do I really do for a living? I'm a logician, right? And within logic, I'm an epistemologist, right? So fundamentally, I'm a logician, I'm an epistemologist, right? And so when I look at the world, I look at it like a mathematician using logic, right? Right? What you are saying is the same criticism I've had for 15 years, but it started coming out most in, no, hold on. It came out first in 2012 when we first separated from the Property and Freedom Society, right? No, just separated is wrong. We created a new branch, right?
Right.
Which was the Anglo model of the property and freedom, so which is why I call it proprietarianism. Right. So, and they said, Curt, you'll never be able to speak to normies. You just do the science, and we'll take it from there. Does this make sense, right?
It makes sense. I still think you're not going down the right road, but continue.
Wait. I'm just giving you history.
I know the history.
Okay, all right. So Martin's smiling now. Now I'm in trouble. And get both of you looking at me with smiles. I know I'm walking into a trap, right? So
I'm not criticizing for not constructing a religion.
No, I'm explaining to the
Okay,
audience
good.
why this happens. Let me finish my story.
Okay.
I'm like an old man wanting to tell the tale of sitting on the boat in the World War II, right?
I guess I've become another Brandon. Continue. Jumping ahead to the conclusion.
Always jump ahead, right? But you know, the narrative puts the explanation in context. So and you're gonna make me forget what the hell I'm talking about. So I started out with that, right? The next phase is when so I'm a logician, right? And so I start coming into this problem of looking at as a logician. But what happens about 2014, people are starting to become aware of me, right? Not just as this guy who's subtly involved in libertarian.
That's when I became aware of you.
Right, I know, right? But what happened was I started getting incredible demand for what I perceived as philosophy or religion instead of logic, science, logic, law, and economics. Right? So this complaint, which I'm sure you remember at the time, because it drove me nuts. I'm like, I'm not trying to do that. Right? But again, you know, I don't have this great fucking vision, right? I just
set out. It's not true. You have well,
I had an vision. My original vision was I need a universally commensurable, value neutral of ethics and politics. Well, wait a minute. I know where you're gonna go. Save it, right? Save it up.
I don't think you do.
What? All right,
well,
let me finish my story. So I go up through this. So now I'm getting frustrated when people are asking me this, right? And so I'm finally I get to where I hit religion, which is in about 17, 18. Because I realized I had to do the grammars because I knew the grammars, but I didn't write it down. Because honestly, this is how stupid I am. I thought it was obvious. Right. And then I do the grammars. Turns out one of my better insights, and they put the grammars. But then once I know that, I started working on religion. And religion is like, holy shit, this is a hard fucking problem. And then I begin to see why these guys want this. Right. And so now I'm like, okay, well, I can't solve religion until I solve this. The epistemology, which is but with the grammars, epistemology is done. Then I have to solve the teaching of this process, which is what really we've been doing here since I mean we write the Constitution, and after that it's just how do we teach this stuff, right? Which has been the big revolution over the 2 years, is making it absolutely teachable. But I've always looked at it since then as putting religion out there as the next problem. In other words, I would solve the bottom up. All right. So that's how I look at the issue, right? Is I look at it like an engineer, as I'm just breaking the problem down and solving it in order. Because I literally took, I mean, people, we've known each other for a long time, right? I mean, it's 8 years or something, right? So I'm really pedantic. I start with, okay, what's metaphysics? And I just work my way through the whole goddamn system, and religion turns out to be, intergenerational transfer.
Right.
So now you tell me what the hell I'm wrong about. Now that I can ruin my fucking life again for the fourth time in this conversation.
You had a grand vision, and it was not what you said it was. It was at the age of 12 in our small idyllic Victorian town on a Sunday, sitting in a pew in a Roman Catholic church. Inspired, I gave an oath to my God that should I become wealthy, I would build him a church. That oath gave me purpose, and I have sought to fulfill that oath for the entirety of my life. But I had no idea that while I meant wealth in the form of money and a church in the form of a building, that he meant wealth in the form of knowledge and a church in the form of revolution, reformation, renaissance for people and for mankind. And once I understood, I felt the task impossible and myself inadequate, but through faith, persistence, sacrifices few can bear, and hard work, I may have at least laid a cornerstone and perhaps a foundation. And in advance of that, you say, for those who would rule themselves in self-interest, rule others out of self-defense, rule our people in their defense, rule mankind in its defense, and by doing so transcend man from beasts to humans to the gods we imagine. What I am pointing to is the gods we imagine. And that in order for us to do that and to be that, we have to understand how all of the activities that humans are engaged in come out of some fundamental, well, the evolutionary computation. Do you understand? So I'm not attempting to convince anybody of anything. To persuade.
You know, it's like it's jumping ahead, but it's more of, you know, I'm talking about how I'm doing chemical procedures, right? And you're saying, yeah, but I mean, come on, you wrote down, I mean, and I'm kind of embarrassed to read that because I'm like, should I ever talk about this in public? Because it's a little weird, right? You know, it's very confessional, but it's true, right? So, but what's the technology I've built is the universally commensurable value neutral method. So yeah, it's ending up there. And yeah, that's the fulfillment of the life goal. But I was talking about procedure. And now what you've done is you've proven me you're right again. It's just exasperating. Martin, do you and Martin and Brandon get together and Brad and then just have these, how can we show that Curt's wrong? Conspiracies? Because it feels like it's a daily occurrence.
You do that all by yourself, Curt.
I do it all. Anyway, so okay, you are right. I need to shut up.
But do you understand what I'm trying to point at? Like,
Absolutely. I'm just saying that when I'm talking, I'm thinking about.
You're in the technology, yeah.
I'm talking about the technology. I'm not. Yeah. That's all. When I say, what am I trying to do? What am I? I'm gonna piss
right.
myself.
But
yeah, but I'm really what I am is I'm trying to be I have an aristocratic sentiment of taking care of mankind, right? I mean.
You're building infrastructure for everybody, a commons that everybody will be able to be housed in.
Yes.
And so what I'm pointing is, why do you do that? Because you're just another instance of a group evolutionary strategy expressing itself.
Yes, right.
And that is what we are doing here as well. And so that it's recontextualizing this venture in its entirety into what we are and into what we come out of, and saying, we as Europeans with a group evolutionary strategy, we ourselves are a particular expression of evolutionary computation. And so this venture is another instance of that same thing. And so that's what I'm attempting to make.
You're trying to reposition the purpose of the organization as less technical and more moral. And I think
not the organization, but the venture that I think all of us are contributing to, that the organization is itself a part of, but not the entirety of.
So our group is engaged in this wonderful, extraordinary ambition. It's very European.
Yes, the Faustian.
It's very Faustian. And that, okay.
And you've articulated and defined the purpose of the organization to produce the technology, to produce the infrastructure that will effectively keep us on that path and allow us to decide whether we are deviating from it or not in all contexts. And yet it is not the path itself, but it is an aspect, but the most important one, I think, of that. And what I'm attempting to point to, not only for our sakes, but also for the sake of the audience and their ability to transport the meaning of what we're engaged in to their constituents and their relationships, is to show how what we're doing is another instance of what we are, and that they themselves can contribute it in all the daily small things, and then increasingly larger things, because they've built the agency to determine whether something that they're doing and that other people around them are doing is deviating from the overall group evolutionary strategy and the fundamental principle of the universe, which is evolutionary computation. And to aim high and to know that it's justified to aim high and to build and invest into what we build to be able to contribute to it. And not to the institute
evolutionary
itself.
Strategy will compute whatever the strategy is.
Yes.
If you limit the delta between your group evolutionary strategy and the laws of the universe, you will especially limit it to marginal indifference. You'll compute the becoming gods.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's a way better thing of positioning our work. You know, you're a very smart guy. I just wish it wasn't humiliating that I had to be smarter. You guys had to be smarter than me.
But this is the computation that is necessary to get to this point.
Well,
this is the thing.
it's like,
Curt, if you weren't what you were, you wouldn't have been able to create these things that make it possible for me to arrive at this point. This is all that I'm saying.
Well, I know that, and I'm trying to, of course, interject self-effacing humor.
Yes.
As a means of adding levity, which is to what's an otherwise very deep conversation.
And I want to add one more thing, if I may, but you please continue first.
No, go on.
Okay, so another thing is that because all of our reasoning tends to happen in this literal and textual form, at least when we communicate it to each other in very highly articulate, resolute form. I mean, you and I and Martin and other people in our group can do this in the oratory form. Many others can't, right? But this is only built on our capacity to produce it also in the written form. And part of the reason, or another thing is that it has to, of course, be written down to be able to be referred to in the intersubjectively verifiable domain, because otherwise we would have to, again, create authority to consult on its articulation. And so because it is the case, and because we have to write it down to be able to refer to it, to be able to defend it, we expose ourselves to the vulnerability of the text itself as it is constituted, as has happened in the case of the American Constitution, becoming and not having enough high resolution. We expose ourselves to the vulnerability of it being misinterpreted, misapplied, improperly defended, because the people who
don't
are
understand
living
its purpose.
Yes, don't understand its purpose, don't have the ability to point out when whatever behavior is extant is defecting from it, and they can't coordinate.
So like in epistemology, you can't have the negativa without the positiva, because it's the adversarial competition between the two that maintains the purity of each.
Yes, the positiva, and I have a difficulty sort of articulating what I am computing internally, if you will.
I don't think you're having difficulty at all. I mean, go ahead, keep going, because it's you're right on spot. You're right on.
Right, and
getting it.
I'm just going to sort of gesture or sketch at it for people perhaps to understand what I'm trying to say, which is I've called this sometimes being in conversation with reality, rather than either just speaking at reality or being spoken at by reality. And conversation meaning, this is again the evolutionary computation by disambiguation that is happening, and it's happening not only through speech. Crucially, like this is the cognitive level that we see it happening as. This is what the method consists of, or allows us to do in the written or spoken word, and allows us to create the high resolution that we now depend upon to create these long chains of reasoning and causality. But the computation and the disambiguation happens also in the realm of, well, and this the speaking is an example of this realm of cooperative, well, first individual and then cooperative venture, of producing returns on energy invested. And so this is the thing I'm trying to gesture at, that again, you've been building the technology, people are contributing to a venture, and so I'm attempting to unify and for people to be able to see how whatever they're doing that is positive and that is contributing to an overall thing that passes the test of falsification, whether by market falsification, whether by logical falsification, by whatever forms of falsification we can apply to it, that what they're engaged in is that fundamental pursuit or expression of the underlying principle of the universe. And so if they can tell that what they're doing is contributing to it, and if they understand the test of falsification that they have to pass for it to be a fundamentally contributory venture to that overall principle, then they're effectively extropian.
I'm already at the end. So okay. What you're saying is that during the course of this conversation, we've reunified the Germanic and the English.
Yes.
And we've reunified continental.
Yes.
And Anglo philosophy.
Yes.
And possibly the pursuit of a new reformation of religion.
Yes.
And that this is only possible if we understand that the Germans have maintained the psychological, emotional, and spiritual and the Anglos have not. They've scienced it to the point where it doesn't any longer reflect that.
Right.
And so by taking this unified approach and putting it in the broader context of not only the universe, but the European group evolutionary strategy, in particular, the Germanic spectrum of which is really the remains of the Indo-Aryan spectrum. We have been able to reunite the two that were divergent under the colonial era and restore the civilizational continuity between them and give people a shared vision that they can understand. And so that needs to be a layer. That needs to be the layer. I mean, I start with the group evolutionary strategy, but I don't, and I start about evolutionary computation, but I don't have this social continuity, social experiential, because what's German philosophy? It's basically phenomenalism. It's basically maintain connected relationship between the rational, the emotional, and spiritual. Mm-hmm. So you're saying that is actually an important part of what we work, and you're saying it's the lack of incorporating that particular position that prevents people from really adopting their work, because it's quite a bit of effort to look at the technical without having the spiritual, moral, emotional goal filled and understood well enough to make the investment and understanding the technology. Just realistically, at that point, if you understand that religious ambition, that spiritual ambition, then technology is just the engineering the institutions necessary to make it come about.
Right, and there's different forms of contribution that people can develop an excellence in that does not consist of the understanding of the method to its totality or the application of it.
So this is where I get to, I'm always saying, I'm just trying to produce judges.
Right.
I'm trying to produce Martin and you and me and the other guys. I'm trying to produce judges. Right? But it's
I'm trying to produce entrepreneurs of civilization.
Well, I get it, right? And so this, which is really what's a fucking priest? He's an entrepreneur of civilization. It just depends on which civilization are you trying to produce with which grammar, which civilization under which group evolutionary strategy are trying to produce with which grammar, and how far does that grammar and group evolutionary strategy diverge from the evolutionary computation
and the interests of the other civilizations that you're in the context of. Like, are you attempting to extract from? Are you attempting to contribute to? Are you attempting to compete with?
Yeah, or so. Yes. Or cooperate. Is that probably the sequence you had there? All right, so now my head's all fucked up. Because I was like, I can just solve this problem, and then I'll solve that problem when I get to it. And I already got enough goddamn work. And you're saying we got to, but it's absolutely true. It's what's preventing us from selling. Because I just wrote this thing the other day of what do we have to sell when it's responsibility.
Right.
Because really, that's what we're saying.
Yes.
Is that evolutionary constitution.
And responsibility for what?
Yes.
For group evolutionary strategy and for evolutionary computation at this scale.
Yes.
And so I'm happy to contribute to stewarding that aspect of the work, at least to the extent that I can.
I love
at
this.
the moment.
It's wonderful. Yeah. There's no. It's like when I talk to Rudyard, I talk to Martin about most stuff. There's like no bandwidth problem, right? When I talk to Rudyard at What Hist about history, there's no bandwidth. I mean, he's a peer, I think of it that way. And he's a great communicator. And when I'm talking about use, I feel the same way on this, certainly on this subject, but most subjects, but this one particularly. So I really like the frame of reunification of the Germanic between the continental analytic.
As the patriarchs or the fathers of civilization entirely.
You take the natural law, right? I mean, which is the church. You take the German, which is the social, and if you take the the Anglo, which is the institutional. I mean, you've got trifunctionalism. Right. I mean, it's all there. And so
it's not just responsibility for its own civilization, but for the totality of civilization, because it has
really. We're saying, I mean, and I keep saying this all the time, is that everybody wants me to be this. I'm an advocate for Western civilization because it's mostly right, despite all the things I like to bitch about. It's mostly right.
Right. And
go ahead.
And it is a wholly positive vision. It is not an oppositional vision. It is one that is saying we have developed gifts to mankind that have benefited us as their innovators or as their experiencers. And we would like to gift them to the rest of mankind on their voluntary adoption and at the pace that they can and want to.
Right. That's actually
and we will,
thing. Yeah.
And we will put ourselves in service of that becoming an avenue of or path of development that you can choose to go down.
And mankind can't afford to have us not do it, frankly, because it really doesn't look very, our mission to drag people along at other than their own pace has been pretty catastrophic in both it certainly didn't work in the Bronze Age. It didn't work in the Iron Age. And despite our efforts at colonialism, it didn't seem to work very well in the modern age.
Well, and of course, at all of those historical junctures, there was, of course, all of the vicissitudes that befall any form of human organization and incentives that go awry or that are not actually forbearing the development of other groups, which ours hasn't done also at all times. And
we're just as stupid as everybody else. We're just ahead of them in the stupid curve.
And we had the luxury and I guess self-interest and interest in general to explode across the globe because of the particular factors that produced our growth.
Right. All right. So I think with that arc, we started out with, please help me understand this. I want to go live in Germany because I can't quite get my arms around the Anglo-German. We're basically the same. Where did that divergence happen? I know that divergence happened, but why? Right. And so I think we covered that and you gave me the insight I want. We took it all the way around to unifying the unifying them again, which is freaking brilliant, really. It's sort of like, anyway, unifying them together with both the continental and the analytic, which is beautiful because I just love that. Now the question is how we reposition, or how do we add that layer on top of what we're saying? Because I basically wrote this thing at its current position, its current iteration, as here's how we bring about a revolution, a reformation. And if we fail, how do we bring about a revolution?
Right.
And so what you're saying is, here's how to give people the meaning of it all.
Yes.
Rather than practicing it.
And I would have. Yes, and I would be happy to engage in further conversation with you, whether that's in the context of other people joining it or you and I as well, and looking more into the perhaps not only the institutional repositioning, if that isn't even necessary, but just the actual institutional production, not just of the institute, but of other forms that can contribute to that. So that would be.
You look at it as religion, right? You say but then you're talking about that's institution. What we're not talking about is messaging, is promotion. So it's like I've done the engineering. Right. Religion is the institutionalization, which is the manufacturing.
Yes.
And the meaning is the sales and marketing.
Distribution. Right.
And so until I sort of think about it in that frame, now it starts to make sense of what kind of problem we have to face. And I was so resistant to God, I'm like, because you know what it is it, to me, it's an inhuman amount of work we've taken on, right? I mean, it's a good thing there's all of us now, right? I mean, right. And so So that's inhuman amount of work we get. And it's like, dude, I don't want to do more. I want to get it right.
I still think you think about it wrong in that sense.
No, I know you
Yeah.
do. I'm just telling you how I thought.
Yes.
Right. And now I'm seeing, well, no, it's a lot making it easier. Anyway, so I want to thank you for the incredible quality of this conversation. What I'd like to do is end the recording and keep this as a discrete one, because I still need Martin and Brandon and hopefully you to work with me on the question I proposed, which it'll probably, like, this is one of those things where one of you says, yeah, it's obvious, don't be stupid. All right. I mean, all right, but it's not obvious because I see all this fields, right? So let's stop this recording. I hope it's okay to publish this. Is it okay to publish? This is a very important topic. And then we can get everybody, I can start the next recording and we can do it. So if any of you are following us, thank you very much for listening to this discourse. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, leave comments, and hopefully
contribute to the Institute.
Yes.
Donate.
And love you guys. Tell Martin he's handsome now that he showed up, even though he didn't say anything. All right. And we'll talk to you next.